episode 73 of the Power Score LSAT podcast. This is Jon in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
Yes, it is. How are you, pal?
I'm good. Been through the holidays.
No, you haven't. You're halfway through the holidays.
Well, I've been through one holiday and there's
Count your
another holiday
chickens.
coming.
Yeah. I'm through the holidays because I'm not doing anything for Christmas, and I'm very excited.
You're back from Nashville. How was the trip?
The trip was great. Yeah, it was, I don't know, pretty low-key, as it needed to be.
Any cough that I'm not aware of? Any fever?
No fevers. We'll find out if I cough. I've got the right kind of cocktail for a cough, so I think I'm probably in good shape.
You've got the kind of cocktail that I think causes coughing,
Well,
typically.
that's only if you can't handle your booze, buddy.
No, that's not correct. I can
Oh.
handle the booze. I can't handle the high acid. Although
I see.
I'm not sure tonight I should be talking.
Yeah, we'll get to yours, which is way overcomplicated. We'll start easier. I've
What
just
are you
got to,
drinking?
you can tell I'm excited about this. I'm announcing it so soon so I can have a sip. I'm having an old-fashioned.
Classic drink right there.
Yeah, it had some Maker's Mark I found.
I think isn't like old fashioned like one of the 3 most popular drinks in America.
In my house.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. And now I'm gonna just kick back and relax while you explain yours.
I don't know if I'll explain the entire thing, but this is in part connected to the song choice of the night.
Mm.
And so the drink I'm having is called a Jet Pilot Tiki Cocktail, which sounds, I know, Jon, to you, that as if you're like, oh, I wouldn't like it. But I'm going to list some of the ingredients here, and you will see that this is it's definitely supercharged. So there's an ounce of Appleton rum, 3/4 of an ounce of Mount Gay rum, and 3/4 of an ounce of Bacardi 151.
Whoa.
That's the starter base for it.
God, this is flammable. This is petrol.
It actually turns each person who drinks it flammable. I mean, it's a tiki drink, man. They're supposed to be lit on fire.
Wonderful.
And then you got like grapefruit juice, lime juice, a couple of syrups like falernum and cinnamon syrup, and then a few bitters, and then a little dash of Sambuca at the end.
I don't know who you recruited to mix all of this.
You know who I recruited to mix
but
it.
she's a sport.
She's the head bartender. She knows how to make drinks, and
I
this
know.
is a drink she approved. And of course, I love tiki culture. I love Mai Tais and things like that. So I wanted to get something with like pilots or something along those lines in the drink, and
There you
that
go.
was this was the closest I could get.
And she's only 8 years old. Amazing.
The daughter is not
Yeah.
yet a bartender. The wife is.
I was thinking about this. The last time we had a Thanksgiving together, she was too young to mix drinks.
She's
your
still
little
too
one.
young to
What?
mix drinks.
She can reach.
No. Try to.
What's the point? No? All right.
No.
You have referenced a song for the night of one of our mutually favorite bands. Do you want to elaborate?
Certainly.
Okay.
So coming up on December 15th is the unfortunate anniversary of Scott Weiland's death. And Weiland was the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots and then later Velvet Revolver. So there's a few people in the music world that I always lament their loss. He's certainly one of them, although not at all the only one. Kurt
Sure.
Cobain, Lane Staley, these types of guys as well. But we wanted to kind of like throw out an old STP song. And so we debated it beforehand, and we have chosen the lead track off the album Purple by Stone Temple Pilots. And that song is Meat Plow.
I know.
Saying
I
it.
always chuckle when I say it,
It's so
but I'm always
crude sounding.
riveted when I hear it. It's such a good tune, man.
I just remember the first time I put that album on, I was like, I hope this is good. I don't know. They got a lot of flack after their first album, which I still think is a great album. And then it just blows the doors off right out of the gate. And I think that album's their best album, easily one of my favorite albums of all time.
Yeah, you mentioned top 50 or so for you, which I mean, it's a pretty extensive catalog on your end. So that says a lot.
I got a lot of favorites.
You got favorites. I would say, I mean, to me, there's not so much a single song, but more just a celebration of their full canon. God, I love that band.
If you want to listen to some hard rock that's driving, it's still melodic and really interesting to listen to, Listen to Purple by them. It is a killer album. I could talk about like Stone Temple Pilots for quite a while. You and I have seen them
Yes, we
together
have
before.
together. Yeah.
I've seen them many times, and they were always an interesting band. And now, of course, they moved on with a different singer, and it's not the same.
No, we had to go to Myrtle Beach to do it, and it was still worth it. So, so yeah, you and I've got a little STP history under our belts.
Myrtle Beach is only like 2 hours, 2.5 hours from Charleston.
Yeah, these are our East
So
Coast
it's not
days.
like, oh my gosh, we had to go to the ends of the earth. A lot of
Well,
people go to Myrtle Beach on vacation and love it. So I don't think we should really be complaining.
yeah, the anus of the earth.
It's not that bad.
All right.
It's worse.
It's worse. Well done. All right, let's get into it.
Yes.
I'm feeling good about tonight. I love these episodes where we get to engage with student mailbag questions, and that is what we have on deck. Beforehand, though, I think we should talk a little about the LSAT world.
Let's do it.
All right.
What's coming up first?
Well, I guess the first thing is a missed opportunity if you weren't a part of it. The January LSAT registration has closed, but February is still open, which we'll get to in a second. In fact, you've got a little time for February. As we've discussed before, and it's actually one of the questions I believe we have on the docket, that January test, but also the February test are really great opportunities. Don't be put off by the new year. Get yourself booked for these things if we can. And I know you want to talk in particular about the uniqueness of January and the size of it.
Yeah, so January registration is closed. We know that the February registration is coming up. That's, I think, as you mentioned, January 6th there. And so I know some people missed the January test. I got a few panicked messages from people, and
Me too.
LSAC does not allow you to register after the deadline. It's just kind of like a hard, fast rule, and I understand why that's the case. But January is a really interesting test. Last year, the number of registrants, not the number of people who ultimately took it, which is always a little bit lower, was 16,139.
So, yeah, some change.
This year, the number of registrants for the January test is 40,761. So that's an amazing difference, basically 2.5 times the size if it was last year.
Yeah, I saw this and thought it was a typo.
Yeah. And I had to look at the volume summaries twice because I knew it was over twice, but I didn't realize it had grown to that size here. And so the test is scheduled for Saturday and Sunday. And I know some people have been asking, they're like, do you think it's going to be everybody on those 2 days? No.
No.
This is now the largest test in like the last year.
Yeah,
and
certainly
so,
in this cycle.
Yeah. And so what's going to happen is they're going to add additional days, which, John, for you and I, is, of course, a disaster.
I'm going to have another old-fashioned. Yeah, this is terrible news. Save me some of that 151.
More days removed, yeah.
Yeah, this is going to devour a week now as opposed to a weekend.
Yeah, I was kind of excited about the Saturday, Sunday. I mean, weekends to me, I just work a lot, so I don't really care if it's Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, or whatever. But I was like, 2 days, that'll be fantastic. No, that's not going to happen. They're going to add additional days. I would expect to see Tuesday and Wednesday added on there. And the numbers will come down because they naturally always do as people withdraw, change, not show up for their test and what have you. But that's going to be another 4-day test almost assuredly.
Yeah. And aside from our martyrdom, what would you say that means for students? Would that put you off taking that test if you're a student?
The number of people that are taking it?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't affect me at all. They're all built around the same scale. It's not going to change anything in terms of like me taking it, whether it's a small test or a larger test.
Good.
Historically, when you look at it, the scoring on the summer LSATs has usually been a point or more, a few points higher than in the winter LSATs. So I'll be very interested to see how the winter LSAT actually plays out here, because when you have this kind of test volume, you're going to have some good scoring, I would imagine, that comes in here.
I think so too.
Yeah, so we'll have to see how it works out. But we'll talk a little bit about the effect this has on the applications for this cycle, as well as the scoring bubble that we've referred to a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hit 2 other things that I think that are interesting, that are unusually enough LSAC related, They actually are doing some stuff here that I think is kind of cool. They got a webinar coming up about people who want to be judges and the path to the judiciary.
Mm-hmm.
So that is coming up, I think, pretty soon on December 10th. So you'd have to go to their website. You can log into that or sign up for it. It is free. It's called A View from a Bench. And they've got a federal judge, a Washington State Supreme Court justice. They've got the associate dean from Cornell. So pretty interesting lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe the final digital law form of the year is coming up. That's on December 12th, but you do have to register by December 10th. So gives you your last shot to put your Zoom face in front of other Zoom faces and look each other in the eyes, as it were.
Yeah,
So
I'm laughing because our Zoom faces are basically just comparing whose hair is longer. And I think you've got me right now.
I'm winning right now.
Yeah, you're winning.
First time ever.
Nah. But yeah, register by the 10th for the forum on the 12th. I always encourage people to go to those. I think they're really interesting experiences. They tend to be a little more dynamic and informative maybe than the initial impression would be. So I think those are a great opportunity.
What's the harm? Even if your cat runs, behind you in the screen, everybody has a laugh while you're talking to somebody. That's great,
That's
little
the
things
upside.
like that.
Yeah.
As we will certainly reference, the law school admissions professionals know that this is a pandemic. It's not like they've lost their view of that, and so they're willing to give some latitude here. But it is kind of interesting because all of this, we're deep into the year, but we are still not even really midway through the application cycle. And one of the things that, John, you and I have talked about repeatedly is the fact that there is a score bubble of high LSAT scores that are floating around out there. There's also a fairly sizable increase in the number of applicants and the number of applications that they've come in. And so I think what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about this and then bleed it into the mail questions that we've got because some of them touch on that.
Oh, I like it. That's clever. Yeah.
I try.
You succeed.
So, interestingly enough, as far as timing, we were going to do this episode today no matter what, but out of the blue comes this U.S. News article this morning that was released, and it is called Law School Applications Rise and What It Means for JD Hopefuls. So I opened it up, started reading it, and they are fairly blunt about the fact that the number of applicants at this point in the cycle is up around 35% compared to last year. And the number of applications that those individuals have put in are up 56%. And if you listen to this podcast, that's no surprise to you. We have been talking about this for a while. And in this case, the goal of the article is to explain, well, why is this happening and what does it mean? And I feel like they really downplay things in this article to some extent. And I'm not even sure they've got the right causes floating around here.
I was going to say causality is tricky in the best of times. These feel at least slightly misplaced, but let's run through some.
Well, we've got the first one up was that there's been a lot of soul searching on the part of applicants, deciding what they really want to do with their lives. And that is the reason they've now decided to go in greater numbers into the legal field.
I know you're waiting for me to say something here. I'm trying to think of something nice to say, as my mother would have taught me. Soul searching is one of those catch-all things of like people are thinking about their futures or something. Or, I don't know, like when business types talk about synchronicity and those silly buzzwords.
Synergy.
Synergy. Yeah, that's a good one. Exactly. To me, what does that even mean? What is soul searching? I think if I was going to try to put a finer point to this, it's not just that people have more time on their hands to consider, but there have been some other things just in the wider world, maybe.
This does come up later.
Yeah. I wasn't going to spoil it.
Yeah.
I might have.
Let's just leave it there then.
Okay.
I think what you're saying is you've got questions about that explanation.
I do.
I do too.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's kind of useless.
I have a tendency to believe that this person was actually referring to other events and that it got classified as soul searching as if it was a separate thing when in fact that's not what it is. So we'll come back to that. Yeah. I'm willing to grant a free pass here.
You're nicer
The second reason that was cited was faster LSAT scores due to the Flex format. Mm-hmm. since we went online, the scores come out a little bit faster, and that allowed people to apply sooner. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that at all.
Yeah, that one doesn't track with me either.
Scores come out like several days to a week faster at most. This is not having a sudden impact on people like applying to law school and making the numbers rise.
An extra third of people because you got scores 4 days. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I really was like, when I read the first two explanations, I thought to myself, this is heading south very quickly. How far south will it go?
Where is the basement?
The next explanation I thought was a little better. I understand this. I don't think it really is very succinct in terms of like presenting the idea, but that there was more free time for people to fill out applications.
I mean, objectively true, but I don't know that, again, any of these can individually account for so many more people. You're talking about like 30,000 extra people or something.
I don't think they're supposed to individually do it. It's supposed to be a collection.
Well, then
I
use
think-
generic terms like soul searching. That'll collect. I'm
Well, I
bitter of
think,
you.
look, if the argument is people had more time to get their applications straight while, the year was still young because of the pandemic, I understand that. So they were ready earlier. I could see that as having some degree of an effect. Then there was the explanation of test timing and really the staggering of tests being different this year and more tests early on, of which I was like, well, don't forget March was canceled. As well as having, so the staggering time as well as more tests. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think that's enough to cause it either.
I'm still with you.
I'll leave you with that. And then Kelly Testi, the president of LSAC, suggested that it was the events of the summer, in part. Obviously, the protests that we had with George Floyd, then the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all came together to make people really start to think about the idea of justice and a legal career and trying to make a change in the culture.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of referring to with the introspection thing earlier.
Yeah, and I think this actually did cause some effect here, although I'd argue that the Ruth Bader Ginsburg inclusion was not a driver of the numbers, certainly not at this point. Maybe it will be in a month or so, but that happened too recently to have had an impact on people taking the LSAT and applying to law school in these numbers.
Yeah, as I've said to you before, it happened too late, but not late enough. I don't think that she fits into this particular uptick as much, maybe, as might be suggested.
And then Kelly Testi's other suggestion was that they've worked really hard to tell people about law school, and they've had more online law school forums to give people the opportunity to think about it. No.
It doesn't seem like, this giant publicity campaign. I don't think that's quite what this is.
It's funny because eventually they get to the idea, and one of the people that they talked to was like, look, the economy, and this is what happens. And I was like, okay, finally, we're actually hearing the economy is the reason, because I don't understand why this is like not brought out instantaneously. This is what happens in times of recession and upheaval. People flee to law school. This is a known thing. We've seen it happen before. And so to me, that's one of the big drivers. Certainly, people have had a lot more time on their hands that they didn't expect. But I think a lot of people were like, man, I caught up on Netflix, what they never thought would happen in their lives.
Right. I'm finally up to the streaming deadlines. This to me was not all that difficult of algebra. It was, people have got more time to study. People have got fewer opportunities immediately, so they pursue this.
Look, if it was 2019 right now and somebody said in 2020 there's going to be a pandemic that more or less stops the world for 6 months, what do you think will happen to law school applicants and applications? I would have been like, give me all the money you have. We're going to Vegas and we're putting it down.
Yeah.
We would win big. I'd be like, they will rise significantly. This is not a big surprise that this is happening.
I don't know that I would have predicted January at 40,000 plus, but I would have at least seen the trend line here.
Jon, I will go back and make sure that we've got that right.
I mean, part of me hopes we do, part of me hopes we don't.
I'll have to run it down wherever it is, but I know for a fact that it's right.
No, I mean, I trust you. If anybody's done the proper research, I know who I'm talking to. I'd also go with you to that Vegas bet. I know you.
I wish I'd known about it in 2019. I could have really made bank on this whole thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure
But
either
so
one of
be
us
it.
would have actually gone to Vegas, but yeah, I take your point.
Well, I was there all the time, at least when I try to be. So
Right.
anyway, so from an application standpoint, yes, people probably were able to apply a little bit earlier because they have more time on their hands. Yes, the economy had a big portion of it. I certainly see the events of the summer and the protests as raising the profile. A lot of the rest of this, come on, man. Faster LSAT scores due to the flex. That's probably the most ludicrous explanation in here. More law school forms. I'm sorry, but that's not a causal factor in this. You may see more of an enrollment, but that's because of other factors in that.
Right.
But it's just a weird kind of article to me. But it does close to the end with a point that says that from Kelly Testy again, the person who should know, she says it's too early to tell, but that application should be up only by about 10% at the end of the year. And I have to say that really astonished me to actually see her say, because I don't see how that's possible from a numerical standpoint. It would sure seem to me that 10% would require numbers for the rest of the year that are already being exceeded by what we're seeing in January.
Yeah, more or less, not just a stagnation, but almost like a withdrawal, some sort of retraction.
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to get to 10 from where we are.
I will bet a case of wine that it is more than 10%.
I really want a case of your wine, but I can't take that bet.
You're not taking that bet.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm also not taking that wine, unfortunately.
If we had Kelly on the podcast, and maybe we will someday, because I find her to be very nice and pleasant, maybe I'll make a bet like that with her. I'll be like the Super Bowl city mayors that have those bets, like a case of oranges versus a case of beer, that kind of thing.
There you go. Oh man, I hope you get a case of Kelly Testy wine someday.
She has some kind of connection to the wine industry. Someone in her family, I think. So
really?
It is more than possible that there might be some good wine to come out of that.
I bet she's got good taste, and I'm sure you won't share. So what do I care?
It's all for me, no wine for you. So at least from an applicant standpoint, I think it's going to be more than 10%, and that usually for most applicants is a cause for concern, because that means a greater degree of competitiveness. But there's another part of this that you and I have talked about, and that's actually the first question in the mailbag. Mm-hmm. It says, I've heard you guys talk about the score bubble on the LSAT-Flex test. What does it mean, and how will it affect this cycle? So what is the score bubble first? You want to take that, or you want me?
You do it. I mean, it's an enormous question that you could probably do in a sentence or an hour, depending, So you take it.
I would have to agree with you on that. You could really go crazy with it. What it essentially means is that you are looking at score bands that have traditional segmentation and percentages. So when we go back to a typical year, we're like, oh, this is how the breakdown of scores that we're going to get. And you see a bell curve from that. Mm-hmm. This year, what we're seeing, and largely because of the flex, we are seeing certain bubbles in score areas. And I will give you one. And again, I will use the data as of yesterday. So in the score band of 175 to 180, at this point last year, there were 530 people who had scores in that range. Obviously, this is the very top of the scaling. On a bell curve, this represents a very small number of people. Whereas 155 to 159 last year was 3,577 people. So many more. There's only 530 who were 175 to 180. This year, it is 110% higher. There are 1,114 people who have scores in the 175 to 180 range. So even accounting for the fact that we have 35% more applicants, we have 110% more scores in the very top range. It's a little bit better in the 170 to 174 range. Last year, there were 1,839 people at this point in time who had scores in that range. This year, it's 2,879, so a 56% increase.
Yeah.
And that's what the score bubble that we've been talking about, because it doesn't stop either. In the 165 to 169 range, it's up 34%. Now, that tracks a lot more closely with what we see from the number of applicants rising. So I'm a little bit less concerned about that. Same thing with like 160 to 164. But when you go down, and let's say you look at the scores that are 140 to 144, those are only up 14.4%. So probably what you're seeing is people who are used to be in that range have shifted up a little bit more. And we've talked a little bit about this. People have had a lot more time to study. That could definitely have a big impact. You and I have said repeatedly that there are a lot of advantages to the flex test. Take it at home in a comfortable environment. There's only 3 sections that are, you're taking. There's no experimental. There's a lot of positives to this type of situation. We still don't totally know how the scoring scale has worked out for these exams.
Right.
But that's what the score bubble is. More people at the higher echelon of scores than honestly there should be at this point.
Yeah, it's created sort of a disturbing asymmetry to the bell curve, frankly. It's looking less like a bell and more like a cresting wave. And I don't know how many people just threw their phones or pulled their car over in hearing Dave explain this. But it is a little worrisome. If I'm a student, that would scare me a little.
Wouldn't bother me. If let's say
Yeah.
you're looking at this affects so many things. If you're relying on prior data to make a decision, you don't know if it's going to be reliable. Will medians stay the same or will they rise? How much more competitive will it be because there are more people in the cycle at this point?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, we don't know. At this point, you don't have even 50% or 40% of applications being submitted. So we're really maybe a third of the way through. We don't have many decisions out. I can say this, it looks to me that it's going to be a slow cycle. And some of the people that I talk to frequently who do this, who I trust, agree and have said this as well. And I've talked about it on recent webinars, and we've said this before. I think it's going to be a slow cycle, which means, by the way, if you're taking it in January, that's good news for you.
Mm-hmm.
It means there's not a whole lot of decisions that are out the door by the time you take that January test. You're not as far behind as you were probably going to feel, but we'll address that in a moment.
Yeah, ditto February, by the way. I think February is actually an earlier, you can't see me doing air quotes, but I'm an earlier test than it typically would be.
Yep, relatively speaking. I think also you're going to see scholarship decisions slowed down.
Me too.
As well. And so this slowness in the cycle is coming because law schools are like, we don't know what's going to happen with the numbers. Maybe Kelly Testy is right and it is 10% at the end of the year. I don't think so. I would strongly argue and bet a lot of money that that is not the case. I could see it up 20% though.
Yeah.
And that has a demonstrable impact. If it's 20% more applicants and then you have a huge score bubble on top of that, law schools are put into an interesting position. If I'm at a law school, I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
Right.
We can't see we can't see what our fellow institutions are doing. And then you're kind of put into the classic situation that we saw in the reverse several years ago. But now it's driving it up. You can either choose to expand your law school size, add more seats. And everybody's like, yes, do that. So your medians would stay roughly the same, but your law school would get bigger. Or alternatively, you could keep your law school roughly the same size or maybe slightly larger and make your medians go up.
Yeah, your medians will have to jump.
Yeah. If you're a law school out there and you're thinking to yourself, we really want to, rise in the rankings, that's what you do. But law school and any graduate school is always about money versus rankings. And of course, higher rankings eventually lead to more applicants, more money. But it's tough right now to see exactly what they will do.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at a school that has a 173 median from last year, I don't know. Do they stay at 173 or do they go to 174 or maybe even 175?
I mean, again, a terrifying prospect if you're listening to this, but a solvable one potentially. It just means you need better credentials yourself. And it's funny, in this sort of arc that we've seen over the past, call it decade, of law school feast or famine, this is a banquet, man. More people with better scores? You kidding me? They're licking their chops. So if you
Law
want to
schools
stay
are
as
too.
competitive, yeah, man. If you want to stay as competitive as you would have been in prior years, it's on you to to basically demonstrate greater virtue, greater attributes.
Yeah, and for those of you who are like, are those really the two main options? There's little things they can do around that, but that's kind of the two things they do. And we saw this, as I said, in reverse. After the Great Recession, when law school application numbers began to drop, schools were faced with a choice of lowering their medians or increasing their, or kind of keeping their class size the same. And I remember I'd have to go back and look at it, but I can remember comparing Virginia, which made sure their medians stayed the same, versus, I can't remember if it was William and Mary, which school it was, that let their medians drop but increase their class size in order to keep revenue stable. And you could see William and Mary's rankings start to drift at that point, whereas Virginia obviously stayed where they were.
Right.
And now what we're seeing is the reverse effect on that, possibly.
Precisely reverse, yeah. I'll be curious to see what happens with some of these rankings, and certainly with the statistics.
When the stats come out, when it's all said and done, that's when we'll see the real interest factor here. But that should tell you something. There's a lot of uncertainty in the law school side of things in terms of making these decisions. And I'm seeing acceptances go out. If you're a great applicant and they really like you, they're still going to accept you. It doesn't matter. It's just one of those things where you may think to yourself, I should get an answer immediately, and it may take a little bit longer. You just may not know. It may be harder to negotiate scholarships early as well. They may not want to give out a full scholarship, on January 15th. They may want to wait a little bit longer and see exactly what the situation is. So I would caution patience here on all fronts.
Yeah.
But I do think overall it'll be a tougher cycle, and that's not any news either. We've said that repeatedly.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, look, if you can see this like rising tide of law school size opportunity, why would you rush offers? Why would you hurry to court people if you're going to have this flood of options?
Yeah, they're going to try to probably balance it out and do what they have prioritized. So, and we don't know. They don't put out a statement that says, hey, we're going to make the law school bigger, or hey, we're going to, raise our medians, or the third option, we're going to do a little of both.
Right.
So I know that sucks for everybody, and I'm sorry about it, but I'm just the messenger, as are you.
No, I mean, there's just no prettier way to paint it. But again, it is sort of surmountable. You got to improve yourself.
I've been helping someone with their personal statement recently, and they've been really pushing the idea of let's get the application in immediately. And I've been pushing the idea of let's get the application right.
Yeah, get it perfect.
And that's what I suggest to everybody. If it's going to be a slower cycle, do you think applying 5 days or 10 days earlier is going to make any kind of impact? No, it is not.
But the score release 4 days earlier, Dave. Come on.
Those extra score release days saved cause a massive wave.
Right.
So, but that leads into our next question, John, which is a question that comes from Twitter. It says, how big of a disadvantage are January applicants at when compared to earlier applicants? And this is something...
Yeah, guy, you take it if you want to. My answer to this is more or less singular worded, which is none. Or disadvantage, none. Potential advantage, enormous.
If you get it right.
Yeah. But it's hard to think that someone with that kind of like runway to January wouldn't do themselves the service.
It's a natural fear, though.
Yeah. But again, I don't know. It's hard for me to think, especially given the numbers we've already kicked around today, that there's any kind of downside to January.
Yeah, I would say this. The biggest upside to everything is put your best foot forward. All right. In the secrets of the law school admission process, one of the things I talked about was this exact thing. And if you weren't there for that, go to our blog. The recording is posted there for free. You can listen to my discussion of this. So I'm not going to rehash the entire thing. But usually taking the January LSAT, the reason people do that is because they want to squeeze a few more points out. They feel like their prior effort wasn't as good as it could have been. But they feel bad because, well, now they're applying a couple months later. In most instances, if not almost every one of them, applying later with a high score is better than applying earlier with a lower score, because law schools look at your LSAT scores and have to report them. they do not care what your application date was. They don't have to report that. It's not used in US News rankings. So that's kind of like the first point, which is, hey, if you can take January and score 2 points higher or 3 points or even 1 point, you are a better applicant just from having done that. Now, on top of that, you add this cycle, which is already slowing down, and the so-called penalty for delay, which I really argue may not be a penalty at all in some instances,
Right.
it's really minimized. In that webinar, one of the things I did was I pulled up a quote from the Yale Law School website where they say categorically, we don't care when you apply. It doesn't give you an advantage to apply early. It doesn't give you a disadvantage to apply later. We're going to take the best applicants. And I would use that if you're sitting there thinking, I'm late, to kind of like ease your mind about that.
Sure. Yeah, be better, not first. And again, it's a pretty simple equation when it comes to that. The scales tip so profoundly in one direction.
Here's the thing, though. Use the time between now and that January test to do 2 things. Number 1, get your LSAT score up.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, make your application as great as it possibly can. And I mean every single word, every single piece. Don't just double check it. Don't triple check it. Quadruple check it. Look at everything. Make sure you don't want to change a thing. That's what gives you the best opportunity to do well here.
Yeah. And find somebody to help you, frankly. This is a year above many in recent years where it really does pay you back to get some assistance. And I realize what that sounds like coming from us, but it's just the simple truth. This is something where you can be improved with some external assistance. Go find it. Or just
Get help.
Yeah, come to us. We'll find it for you.
Well, get help or avail yourself of the many resources out there where you can learn more about this. I mean, I just talked about a webinar I did like 2 weeks ago where I talked about things that are really applicable to a broad range of what we do, that you can learn about this. It may take more time to do it that way, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. And it's not something that is anything more costly than the time that you spend doing the research, which you should be doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd like to think most of our listeners probably were participants in that webinar, or at least have seen the recording. But if not, man, do yourself a favor. Dave killed it.
I tried.
What's next?
A couple of questions about LSAT scores, John.
Oh.
I will read them.
Okay.
We'll see what you have to say about them. These were both email questions that have come in over the past, I don't know, few weeks or maybe even months. But I like them because they both addressed a similar idea. The first one is from Haley and says, I'm not the best test taker, and I am definitely not the best LSAT taker. I've taken the LSAT 4 times. I have 3 pretty bad scores, with my second score being my best. This score should get me into my top school, but I am very concerned that they will look at my other scores and not accept me because of them. And then added to the end of this, I also had some tech issues and was kicked out of the exam for some time. You know, I've emailed LSAC, but I don't think they're going to do anything about it. So let's take that question and hold it.
Okay.
Let's go to the next question, which is related to it. It's from Yakov. Another, I don't know if this was Twitter or email.
Yeah.
It says, I would love to go to Penn where the median LSAT is 168. If I get a 168 on my October test, will it hurt my chances of getting in because I already have a 163 on record?
Yeah, I see why you've grouped these now. Because the answer to both is essentially redundant. Schools care about your high score. If you need a 168 to get into a school, it doesn't matter if you've got a 163 or a 123 on record. They're going to look at your 168. To Haley's question about not being a great test taker in 4 attempts, that one shining moment is the one that schools are going to focus on. You may want to write an addendum if you feel that there's a worrisome, call it pattern or trend or something. I think, Dave, you've said this really nicely, unimprovably before, which is if you feel like your history of test taking could raise a question, explain it in advance.
Yeah.
And that could come from a series of cancellations or some score fluctuation, but that one score will carry the day. I love that.
It washes away the past.
That's a
And
great way to
to
put
some
it.
extent, the future if you score lower.
Sure.
It feels terrible, though. Let's say you've gotten a score and then the next score you take is several points lower or more. You're like, I've just hurt myself. In the old days, yes.
Mm.
When they average scores and every school used the average, you had hurt yourself. That's no longer the case, though. And again, that's because the ABA changed the regulation a number of years back now and said, hey, you don't have to report the average anymore. You can report the high score, which was a really smart decision because the high score is, to me, indicative. If you're able to go out and get a certain score, you are that score. Now, with these two, I'd say there's actually a difference in how I would handle them. In Yakov's situation, 163 to 168, I don't think it looks anything abnormal at all. It looks like somebody who's like, I didn't like my 163, I gave it another shot, did better. They're not even going to have a question about it. It requires nothing further. In Haley's situation, I do think that an addendum, as you suggested, is exactly the right thing to do. And in addition, I would argue that talking about problems with the flex, the technical problems, is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you've got adverse results and you can point to things that happened, I would definitely do so. And in addition to that, I wouldn't let LSAC off the hook. If you have emailed them about a problem with your test and didn't get a response, and this is not the first time I've even heard that this week, email them again, get a response. They have your session on file. They can go look at it and be like, oops, there was a problem.
Yeah.
There are instances where that occurs. Now that she has her score, that's a problem. But especially after the test, if there's a technical issue, they will sometimes be able to say to you, we'll either put a note on your file that says you had a technical issue, or they've in the past have given the option of canceling. Don't wait if you don't get a response. There's enough time after the test to go address that. That may have passed in, that may have passed in Haley's situation, but I still think a law school would be like, oh, we understand there was a problem with their flex test. Again, law schools understand that the flex is a test that is dependent upon technology and is not necessarily perfect in delivering kind of like a stable Wi-Fi connection at your house.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I explained this to a student once, that you don't navigate by constellations. You just need a North Star. And that's, to me, what a great test is. In the full, vista. There can be all these little pinpoints, but if you've just got one to fixate on, which schools do, you're golden.
I didn't know you were going to go like all 1830s Mariner on me.
I was. I'm a plumb bob here.
You got your sextant out from the
yes,
bridge
my
of the,
sextant.
the
I
ship.
do. Star charts. But it's a stretched metaphor, but it holds, I think, because all schools really need is just one thing to justify their yes. If you can just have that point in the distance, you're good.
Yeah, the thing I've said in some webinars recently is if there's a natural question about your record that would come up where someone would immediately want to know, put it down.
Right.
You don't have to write an addendum about every little thing. 163 to 168 does not require an addendum at all. But the description of Haley of the record there, that sounds to me like an addendum, especially when there are mitigating circumstances in terms of technical problems. So
yeah,
that's the way to think about it.
Completely agree.
Let's move on.
Yeah, what else we got?
Let's move off a little bit of the straight up scoring record and so forth. Let's go to an email question from Mara, who says, I hope all is well. I'd say it's pretty good, although this drink is super strong, as it turns out.
I'm concerned for you.
It is.
I was going to ask how you were doing, but I was actually scared of the answer.
I knew it would be strong, and there's enough sugar in it from the syrups to cut it, but boy, I will feel it later.
Yeah, you're drinking kerosene.
I would really like to hear what Jon and Dave have to say about whether the LSAT will ever return to in-person testing. And if so, whether it will follow the format of the Flex or the traditional LSAT.
God, you're going to make me answer this. I wish I could see that well into the future, because I'd have other answers too. I could see the Flex sticking around. I think at some point they're going to have to add back in, and we've talked about this, an experimental section. I don't think they can keep this at 3 permanently. I think they're going to have to add in some bathroom breaks. Break. You mentioned earlier some of the advantages of taking the Flex, and the first one that came to mind was that you can wet your pants in private.
Is that truly an advantage? Question that.
Beats public, but
yes, it does.
But if I'm LSAC, you'd think that they're probably in favor of this particular deployment, frankly. You don't have to hire centers. There's proctoring involved, but not face to face. There's a lot of upsides for the company that makes this choice.
Yeah,
So
I think
I don't know if Flex is permanent, but I could see some form of it persisting.
the longer that it goes on, the more likely it is to stick around.
That too,
I
yeah.
I do think that there are only two outcomes whenever the decision gets made. And the first is, as you said, and as we've talked about before, if some form of the flex becomes the permanent LSAT, they have to add a fourth section, maybe even a fifth, although I don't like the idea of expanding the testing time because of the possibility of more technical problems.
Yeah.
But they need to at least add an experimental and a break in the middle of the test. I think maybe they're starting to understand the cheating thing is less of a concern, although, always something that they need to watch vigilantly, and I support that. The alternative is they do go back to in-person testing, and I think they would immediately go back to the 5-section test with an experimental and 2 LR. That test form is more stable than the Flex, in my opinion. I think it's more predictive. A good example is this. The score bands on a regular LSAT are plus minus 3 points. The score bands on the Flex test are plus minus 4. So
Yeah,
you see more of a deviation with the Flex. And I think also the Flex right now, for whatever cause, certainly we've debated this directly with LSAC, and we have different opinions on what is causing the score bubble at the top. Their opinion differing from ours is what I mean, not you and me.
No, I know.
I think that we know what the regular LSAT produces, whereas the LSAT-Flex is so young, it's really hard to say. I hope they're right. I fear they're not. So we'll have to see what happens.
They need a sextant.
And a North Star.
And a North Star. That's such a good reference, buddy. I love it. So yeah, time will tell. I've said this before, and this is my own personal suspicion. I think if they're going to make some kind of more permanent announcement, I could see it coming with the June test next year.
Yeah, we know we're through April with the Flex. So right now, there's no pressure for anybody to make a decision. I have a feeling they debate this in the what would be the virtual hallways of them discussing things in Zoom meetings and so forth. It has to have crossed their mind because there are definite advantages to them. And more importantly, they've now kind of like taught an entire cycle of students how to take this test online and to have expectations there. That's not an easy thing to throw away. And let's be honest, in 20 years, presuming the LSAT is still a big part of the law school admissions process, do you really see an in-person test? I don't. I see it as being virtually delivered, probably in a 3D environment of some sort.
Hologram proctors or something.
Yeah, it's basically Ready Player One in the future is the way I would see it. And so if you know that future is the eventuality that you're going to arrive at, why fool around now? Why not make the change and then try to really polish it and refine it so it's as good as possible?
I'm with you. Oculus LSAT. I'm ready.
Yeah.
There was a question that came in to you on Twitter. I'm curious to get your take on it. It's something we've also talked about in the past, but it was right to the point. How quickly do your LSAT skills fade?
I like this question.
I do too.
As soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to answer it. Not as fast as you think, and in many cases, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a blog article a while back called Why Breaks from the LSAT Can Increase Your Score. And one of the points I made in there is that the way studying for this test works is that there's so many big conceptual building blocks that a lot of people aren't familiar with. When they first start studying, they're really challenged by the test. It doesn't feel comfortable at all. And I've analogized it to driving. I'm like, you're trying to hit the blinker, you're trying to, turn left, you're trying to hit the brake or the accelerator. You're trying to do all these things at once, and it's not comfortable at first. You come back a year later, and that person's a much better driver. You come back a couple of years after that, and they're way better, hopefully.
Usually, sometimes.
Depends on the person.
Clearly, you've never met my sister, but yeah. I take
Is she a bad driver?
Dude, she goes through 7 side view mirrors a year.
Did she go through one while you were in Nashville?
Oh, we didn't get in the car. I know better.
Good for you guys. I'm proud of you to have not left.
I worry about her skills with a stroller, much less a vehicle.
Oh my God. I Should send that to her and be like, just so you know, your brother is saying this online.
She knows. She knows.
Well, anyway, back to the point. The LSAT is like this to me. It's a bunch of skills you're juggling that you're not comfortable with. And so what happens to a lot of people is they can learn some of the things, like they learn conditional reasoning or how to diagram a game, but it doesn't really sink in. You take a break from the test, and what happens is your subconscious keeps on working with it, and it starts to place these pieces in an organized format. And from there, you can then, when you come back, you're like, hey, I'm a little bit faster at this. Yeah, because your mind, your subconscious has worked on things, even though you weren't thinking about it directly, your mind put the pieces together. And so what happens with a lot of LSAT skills is that they may dull a little bit because you're not directly thinking about ideas like causality or
Right.
absolute terms and so forth, but they're still there underneath. Once they sink in deep enough, I don't think that they really go away. And you may run across a rule and be like, I forgot how to diagram this, but they're just below the surface and they can be brought to the surface very quickly.
Yeah. That's perfectly put. I love that blog, by the way. If anyone listening to this hasn't read it, go track it down. It's really good. In part because it's so practical. The the utility of it is hard to understate. This to me is the difference in like short and long term memory in a way, where
Yeah.
you're not you're not memorizing dates and numbers. Take a history test that you're cramming for. You're learning skills, and once those are ingrained, it takes an awfully long time to unlearn them, if ever.
100%.
How long would you not have to speak English before you were not fluent? For me, 3 weeks. For most people, I don't know. But I mean, that to me is a good analogy too. You use driving, I'll use language. That's really what this is. Once you know how to speak the LSAT, it takes an awfully long time for you to lose that edge, those skills.
Yeah, and it's, there's that famous phrase about like, riding a bike.
Mm.
It's, you should pick it right back up. It's the same type of thing here. This is a question that comes up for a lot of people who are on the verge of burnout because
Yeah.
they're like, I don't want to take a break from this. I don't want to lose my edge. And I always say the same thing. Burnout is going to dull that edge way more than taking a break is going to dull that edge. I would much rather say, hey, you've been studying week after week, month after month. Take a week off. You'll be better when you come back typically. And sometimes just hearing that, realizing, hey, it is okay for me to do this and I'm not going to just become a disaster, is enough for them to be like, all right, I'll take the break. They come back and they're like, hey,
Yeah.
I am a little better. I'm like, yes, I thought so.
Perfect. I like it. I'm glad that question came up because it's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Me too. Next question, John.
An email from Jennifer. She hasn't been working for the past 6 months due to, well, obviously COVID. Does that look bad, this gap in what would be a resume or something? Will law schools flag this as me just sitting around this year? I think law schools know we're all sitting around this year, Jennifer. Some of us more or less productively. But no, remember though, and again, something we stressed before and I'll repeat, if you feel there's anything a law school might concern themselves over that could be a negative, some sort of blemish, just explain it. You have that opportunity. You're not basically like a victim of your own silence in this. So tell them what's been going on. Let them know.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on this. And really would like to emphasize the point. Law schools are aware that there's a pandemic going on. You can't put it more bluntly than that.
Yeah.
So all of a
What else to
sudden,
say?
they're like, oh, someone stopped working in March. I wonder why. They don't have to look very far for what they would see as the explanation. And consequently, when you kind of think about it that way, you're like, oh, they're willing to understand that. The kind of take that I've had on this and heard from admissions deans is it's not so much that, you lost your job. A lot of people did. We're not going to hold you accountable or somehow in the negative for that. The better question is what did you do with the time?
Right.
Did you do anything else? And don't say, I caught up every Netflix streaming series that I ever wanted to watch. That's admirable and impressive, really. However, it's not going to impress them. They want to see that you did something with your time. Is there something that you went out and did as an alternative? Like, what's the COVID skill that you got out of all this? Did you explore your interest in the French language and the French legal system? Did you take online classes or something along those lines? What did you do to better yourself? And I
Or
think
to
that's
maybe
what
to
they're
better
all.
others, frankly. I see some people
That's a good way
have
of putting it.
spent their time with family. I mean, I know you've got a kid doing remote learning at home. I'm sure you spend quite a bit of time just helping her with her academic opportunities. I'd like to think so, and you don't have to answer that if it's no. Get in your
I
house,
have
Dave.
helped her, obviously. I would say that my wife has done a really amazing job with her. She loves to do it.
Good.
So sometimes I'll go in there to help out, and they'll be like, yeah, we're doing stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm out.
Cocktails and childcare. She can do it all.
No, not that. But I think, there are so many things and ways to kind of like address this point that they're not going to hold it against you. Just on the face of it, everybody's in the same kind of boat, dealing with the same type of situation. So don't worry about that point, but do try to explain when there are gaps of this sort or gaps at any point in your record. Try to let them know I wasn't just doing nothing. I was actually improving and preparing myself for the next phase.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Next question came from Twitter.
Mhm.
Says, I have a letter of recommendation that is over a year old. Do I need to get it updated?
I think in general times my answer would probably be no, but in these times in particular, my answer is no. No. It's a little bit like the last question. It's pretty well understood that you and professors haven't been interacting quite the same way, or
Excellent
whoever
answer.
wrote it.
I like that answer. My usual answer is no, but now it's
But
definitely
now
no.
it's a capital N. Yeah.
Look, bothering a letter of recommendation writer and going back and being like, hey, I know you just did this like 8 months ago or 12 months ago. Now you need another one. That is an invitation for someone to be like, why don't you go jump off, the end of the earth?
I didn't even think about it in terms of courtesy.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Is there something dramatic that would have happened in your relationship in the last 12 months where all of a sudden they'd be like, absolutely not. I now hate you. I'm going to write you something negative. No, of course not. You can use letters of recommendation that aren't immediately fresh and certainly go back a year or two, I think, without any concern whatsoever. I know that for law school applicants, there's this thing of like, no, it's going to be a question mark. No, it is not. The feelings that people had when they were working with you and then asked to write something are considered to be kind of like a prism as to how they really feel about it. It's not going to change in the ensuing months. So don't worry about it, even though I understand why the concern is there.
Yeah, the maybe one caveat I would put on this is if your relationship with that person has changed so much to your benefit, in your favor, that it might be good for an update. You've got a promotion at work or something like that. But yeah, failing some sort of progressive step, don't worry about it.
That's a great point. They wrote it 2 years ago, and in the ensuing 2 years, you've actually collaborated on a couple of papers.
I saved their life twice. That kind of thing.
That's relatable.
Yeah, that's who I'm looking for to write mine.
But if there was some kind of really dramatic positive change in their perception, yeah, then I could see it. But I don't think that's going to be the norm.
Yeah.
Last question, John.
Let's hit
An
it.
email question. Question about the character and fitness section and background criminal history.
Yeah,
think
now
you have
we're
a lot
getting
of
into my
experience
field
with
of
this stuff.
You're such a dick. But you're not wrong. So let's do this.
Here's the question.
Okay.
Most of these questions on the application have very specific language stating something along the lines of, you must report all offenses, including offenses involving alcohol or drugs. Does that question include a ticket for public intoxication? Look, I'm just going to answer that. Yeah. It's an offense, and it includes alcohol or drugs. Yeah. Now the real question. How much does this really impact your chances of getting into a law school? There was no conviction, no follow-up actions besides a small fine, and there's no prior history. Do I need to be concerned?
No, you need to be transparent, but I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. In fact, there is zero question whatsoever that this would be of any impact.
Right.
Youthful offenses and indiscretions are in almost everybody's history, certainly yours and I's. So
Yeah,
it
don't
is.
single me out here, by the way.
I said me too.
No, I know you did. I wasn't sure.
I said hi. I was a youthful idiot.
Yeah.
I'm not going to deny it. I did some things I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But then the key here is admit it. All right. Come clean about it. As you said, be transparent. And then secondly, realize that if you're going to address that, and you're probably going to have to mention it, talk about that, it's not going to happen again and you learn from it and that you feel foolish and
Yeah.
regret it. Showing contrition and understanding and growth from an incident like that is the best way to explain it.
Sure.
Because that's what they're looking for. Will it happen again? No. What was that? It was a reckless driving when you were 18. Oh boy, I had that too. Or whatever the case may be. They are adults who understand how people operate in life. And being young, part of what being young is you're going to make mistakes. Hopefully the mistake isn't so great that it follows you throughout the rest of your life, but something like public intoxication is not going to. Now, if it happened 3 days ago, okay, that's a problem.
Yeah. But, I mean, again, I think most of this you could chalk up to some relatable foolishness. So,
Yeah.
schools, adcoms, they're not going to hold this against you forever.
If we do another podcast, with a different title, I think Relatable Foolishness might actually be a good title for it.
It's our band name.
Don't get me started on band names. That's one of my favorite discussion points.
As long as we can do some STP covers, I'm in.
Oh, yeah. Meat Plow.
You got to do the Wyland part.
I'll do Wyland. You got to play the guitar.
I know.
I'm not that good a guitarist to play Dean DeLeo.
Oh, no, neither am I.
He's good.
Give me a triangle or something. But tambourine in the back.
I used to be able to do a really good Axl Rose, and I don't think I can do it anymore.
I don't think he can do it anymore.
I was just going to say I can't sound like Axl now.
Yeah. You don't want to. Speaking as a guy who saw him live not too long ago and despaired, don't sound like Axl now. And damn sure don't look like him.
I saw him and Guns N' Roses, and the Struts were the opener maybe 3 years ago down in San Francisco at AT&T Park. And I did not like the show. And you saw him, was it last year?
Halloween, my birthday week last year. I saw him.
And hated it.
It was just, it was sad more than anything. It's a little bit like when U2 opened for Muse, or followed Muse on that tour that you saw. That's kind of how I'm sure it felt. The Struts to lead in, and then you've got to be Axl Rose. It looks like a bloated corpse. Jeez.
This is actually, that concert is why I'm familiar with the Struts, because I was like, who's this band, the Struts, that are opening for...
that was your first Struts show?
Guns N' Roses, and so I started looking into them, and I was like, these guys jam. Jesus. And then I became very excited about seeing them, and then, of course, Guns N' Roses was very corporate. I don't know how to describe it. Pedestrian?
I don't know. Axl looked like something they fished out of a river, and sounded like it. It was bad. That was the show that made newspapers the next day because he jumped off a one-step stage and collapsed.
He just wanted to go home.
Yeah, I think he was just like,
need to go to bed. A break. Yeah, that U2 show you're talking about is the one that we went to in Raleigh.
Yeah.
Where Muse opened. I know what I'm mixing up Muse shows.
I think you might be, because...
You weren't at that U2 show.
You were in one in like Alpharetta or something, I think is where you were.
I've been to that one too. Remember, I've seen them a lot, so...
I know.
It was
caught him on that tour a few times. I didn't see you. I've never seen you two.
That's right.
By choice.
This was at Carter Finley Stadium, and the worst thing about that show was that we got there, and we're drinking in the parking lot, having a good time. We go in, and I'm like, let's grab some beers. And keep looking around, and I'm like, man, lemonade, water, soda. I'm like, and I realized, I was finally asked somebody, I was like, where's the beer? And they're like, oh, this is a dry stadium. And I was,
good Lord,
just about lost my mind.
To Utah.
You go down to the floor of the stadium for the show, music is just coming on, and I look around, and everybody around me has these little mini bottles. I was like so angry.
Nah. It's funny you started that story with the worst thing about that show was we got there, and you could have ended it with that sentence. I think.
When U2 came on.
Yeah.
They were terrible. We left and actually went out to the parking lot. The cops came by because we were drinking out in the parking lot, kind of listening to the show. And they're like, what are you guys doing out here? We're like, the show is terrible. U2 sucks. Yeah. And I've said this before. U2 to me is a band that used to be great. I saw them years and years ago and they killed. So I was like, they'll be good. But I haven't liked one of their albums in 20 years.
Yeah, they didn't make the Power Score podcast playlist, that's for sure.
If they do, it's going to be something off like War or Boy or...
Fair enough. Well, Joshua
really super
Tree.
early. Anyway, this is a long segue to the end of this podcast.
I don't know where we just went, but I liked it.
I could talk about concerts all day.
We're in your wheelhouse now. I could talk about youthful indiscretions.
Yeah. The last thing is you and I saw Muse in Raleigh, but it was at the PNC indoor stadium that they have there.
That's right. I remember we hopped on a plane and flew into Nashville for a night as well.
Yeah, at the Bridgestone Tire Center there.
Yeah, Bridgestone.
There you go.
Anyway, we got some stories to tell. Just not anymore tonight.
Not anymore tonight. We'll play that on the Youthful Indiscretions podcast someday in the future.
It's my next band.
Let's call it out. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. If you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it in the world. And if you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment or a rating. If you have any questions for a future mailbag, you can send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On behalf of Jon and myself, thanks so much for listening. Stay safe out there.